Hello everyone, welcome to Clarity 16.0.1 Supportability and Feature Training. My name is Dave Sprague. In this section, we are going to be covering the roadmap updates that are new for this release. Let's get started. There's three areas we're going to cover. First, from the roadmap timeline perspective, we've added a new capability referred to as roadmap events. Essentially, it allows the user to configure visual indicators for roadmap level events using today, roadmap start, roadmap finish, or any other key dates that are important to communicate to your audience. If you remember in 16.0, that release included the ability to configure visual indicators for roadmap item events. So this is different. This is at the roadmap level itself. Secondly, targets. Targets can now be displayed in the timeline board and grid view. Previously, targets were could only be included in the grid view itself. Targets have been converted to the flexible and configurable widget tooling, and all previously defined targets are preserved and converted to widgets upon upgrade to 16.0.1. Last but not least, from the roadmap timeline perspective, the PDF export capability has been updated to optionally include the legend or configure widgets and roadmap events. So why is this important? Well, first off, on the events, this is a feature request from the Customer Innovation Program. In order to drive adoptions, users now have that added flexibility to ensure the presentation will be impactful to executive and management stakeholders. Targets. Targets are used as either goals or constraints. Adding, moving, or removing roadmap items provide the ability to effectively perform roadmap planning while meeting or exceeding those defined targets. On the PDF export side, this was also a feature request from the Customer Innovation Program. Roadmaps provide that ability to get the data out from wherever you are without having to go to a separate location, and it minimizes the reliance on separate BI tools. Again, from an adoption perspective, users are demanding these tools to selectively incorporate information, providing those stakeholders with relevant information at the right time. So let's take a look at what's changed. Roadmap events. View options. From the view options area, users can optionally display roadmap indicators for events. Events represent dates such as today's date, roadmap start or finish, which are all three of those are out of the box events that are pre-configured, or any other configured date, such as here's an example of an international press briefing. And as I mentioned, the today, roadmap start and finish represent three out of the box predefined events. Over on the right-hand side here, you can see some events that have been configured for today and this international press briefing that I was referring to. And notice how they're displayed in a dedicated swim lane for events. This image in the forefront here is new in the view options area to, number one, turn on the swim lane, and then two, turn on visually presenting those events and managing and an area to manage those events to create new ones or modify existing. Just from a workflow perspective, it's a simple step through to create an event from the timeline itself. Hit view options, bringing up the new section that I showed on the previous slide. Toggling on shows the event swim lane. Checking the box presents the items in the roadmap event. In the roadmap event swim lane on the timeline itself. If you wish to manage the events, you can come down into this area here, define your new event, supply the requisite information, and then close the box, and you are done. Targets. As I mentioned, the user experience for targets has changed to that of widgets. Fundamentally, the ability to set up goals or constraints has not changed. It's just kind of the underlying capability, technology to deliver them to the screen has changed. We've also introduced a new widget type called Target, strangely enough, for roadmaps. And you can now switch between roadmap, board, and grid views and see targets. And these targets are maintained upon upgrade and saved in the widget library. So I've turned on the widget area, optionally hide or show. There's an area to manage them, to define new widgets, whether it's a target or other. But here's some sample target widgets, as well as a typical pie chart widget that has been also positioned on the roadmap. As I mentioned, there is a new widget type for targets. Upon upgrade to 1601, you'll see this. And this is not available on any other parts of the application. It's just for road mapping. And once you define that, you can include them on the roadmap timeline, board, or grid views. From a create flow perspective, it's quite simple. Manage widgets, which will bring you to the new area. So you pick, in this case, you would say, I would like to have a new widget. You could optionally say just add an existing widget to the screen and you could be done. Or you go on and create a new one and you have a target widget type at your disposal. Fill in the target, excuse me, to define the behavior and select save. Once in the page where the widget is displayed, there is a pencil icon to edit the target, which is an example of that. UX is over here on the bottom right. Just fill in the requisite information and tab away, and your widget is now functioning, calculating underlying data that's in view. PDF export can now optionally include those widgets and the legend. We've got feedback from customers that they wanted to include that in the view for their readers. And they'll only present those in the exported PDF file if they're in view. So if they're hidden, they will not be included in the PDF output. And a couple other minor changes. The file name that is created only includes the roadmap name. In the previous release, the file had the roadmap underscore, and then it inserted the saved view in use. So we've done away with that, just simplified it and given it the roadmap name. The file itself, the image itself also will no longer have the roadmap name or ID in the exported file. Last release, that was there. This release, it's been removed and it's simply mentioned in the file name. Okay, let's kind of take a look at this in action. We'll look at roadmap events. We'll look at roadmap targets, and then we'll close it out with the roadmap timeline exporting to PDF. Okay, I'm just going to exit the PowerPoint and go to our demo. Okay, here we are. We're in the roadmap area. I've landed on my timeline view. I've got my view options over here. This was moved over to the far right for accessibility reasons and also presented in a flyout now. And I call out the flyout because if I've selected a roadmap item itself, and then I come over and look at the details tab, given that my priority is now the details information for that selected roadmap item, that's what I'm going to see. So you notice that the view options window closed. So let's go ahead and close that, bring the view options back. You can see I've selected my start and end periods from, kind of 2021 end of year, and I'm going over here to 2024, beginning of 2024 as my span of what I want to see in my view. The roadmap start date is actually different than that, but I'll explain that in 1 minute. Let's go to the events tab. We have a new area on here. The roadmap item events was delivered in the prior release, so we're going to focus on roadmap events. First thing I'll do is I can toggle on roadmap events, which exposes a swim lane that's dedicated to these events. You can see I can just toggle that off. It can be blank. So I'm going to fill that now with some information, such as today. That's today's date. It always knows, as this is an out-of-the-box event. Roadmap start and roadmap finish are also available as out-of-the-box events. Now you see why I use different start and end periods to display my visual, because I wanted you to see the roadmap start and finish timelines. If I just selected a roadmap start and finish this dotted line that I've used for this example would be pinned against the edges. So I just wanted to give you a little more visual into the start and finish. I've created a few other events here in terms of an international press briefing that we're going to hold at some point in Q2. I can hover on these things and a little pop-up tells me the date and the name of the event. I've also got two other items here. We've got a launch event in the summer and then again in the spring that coincides with some of the work that we're doing. So I just want the team to be aware of the activities that are upcoming. Again, I can hover on those items and see what they are and the date. Now, if I want to manage these existing events or add new events, I click on Manage Events, and here's my listing. You can see these are grayed out right here because they are seeded, but I can pick images, and if I want, I can add images for the roadmap start or finish. As you see, I don't have an image. I just have border lines for that by design. That's what I wanted to do. The international press briefing is set up. The spring launch event, I can add a line here just for visualization and come back, and you can see kind of what the behavior is there. When I change that color and change the line, it turns the whole icon that same color. So I'll go back in there and kind of get rid of that. I'll go to none because I just wanted to have a simple rocket there. Again, creating a new event is very simple. These aren't tied to any particular attributes associated with the roadmap. You decide the name and date, the image, and a line if you would like. And, so you don't even need an image, you can use a line. But either way, those are all presented directly in that swim lane event. Okay, so that covers off on roadmap events. Let's switch gears to targets. So I'm just going to go over to the grid view because that's initially where they were seen in the prior release. And I'm going to say manage widgets. And here's all if you can see the items here that say edit, edit, edit. I can add those. Actually, what I want to do here is I'm going to grab my targets view and it'll bring up the widgets that I constructed for this view. Capacity, capital cost, operating cost, total cost represent targets. And then these are other non-target related widgets that I brought up. Essentially, targets behave the same way as they have in prior releases. They're looking at either as a goal or constraint. I know that we're kind of over, there's a lot of red there, so I'm going to remove this guy from plan and kind of ease the capacity and capital costs and operating costs targets and see. Now my next job is to kind of work on total cost and look at things because this is calculating on what is in plan. As I mentioned, the ability to edit is simply right up there. I can go in and just change that to, new target there for capacity. We only have about 3,500 hours across the board, so that's going to be a problem. We're going to have to look at some further adjustments. So that's essentially widgets as they're presented. I'll open up the widget area to just kind of explain that upon upgrade, your widgets will be placed into the library and they'll be associated with a view when you upgrade. There is a limitation of 10 widgets on the page at any given time of any type. Once, as you come in to manage widgets, the add buttons will be, as you get to 10, the add buttons will be grayed out, right? As soon as you remove one, that'll free up for another. So just be aware of that. Okay, so let's move on to the PDF export. So I'm going to come over to the timeline and I'm going to bring back the events to show that. And I don't need that. Got our events. I've got our widgets. I'm going to bring on my legend. I'm going to select the export to PDF, get that processing. Now, I've mentioned if the widget row is hidden or the legend itself is hidden, they will not be exposed in the output, but I've consciously decided to include them. There's the file down here in my tray. I can just bring that up, and there is my timeline kind of fit to a one-page mode. So it's a beautiful thing. Really excited to be able to deliver that capability today. All right, so that concludes the roadmap updates section. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.